to some level of normalcy. This is especially true when it comes to people's work lives. The last 12 months have seen the work environment completely uprooted, with many companies around the globe shuttering their offices completely and almost all others at least partially. Now, we've heard this referred to repeatedly as the big work from home experiment, an experiment that was forced on all of us, ready or not. Now, some people say the experiment was a huge success, declaring an end to the office environment and the beginning of a new era where we all work remotely from wherever we want to be. Now, of course, others are declaring it a total disaster, coining new terms like Zoom fatigue and work from home burnout. So what does this mean for the future? What is the so-called new normal? Now, I've actually written about this in several editions of my newsletter on LinkedIn. I've asked about it in several posts on LinkedIn, and I had over 4,700 people around the world respond to a related poll, trying to decide what the new normal will be. My conclusion is that the new normal will not be static. It will change and evolve, and it will probably do so much more slowly than we were all forced into this changed environment. The best way to prepare for a new normal that may evolve into something that we can't even predict will be to prepare to be resilient. There will not be a one-size-fits-all solution. When it comes to determining what your office space will need to look like and what changes you'll need to consider, your company's needs may be different from another company's needs. It will depend on the functions carried out in your facilities and on the attitudes, the beliefs, and the desires of the people that work there. I've talked to a number of facility managers that manage office space for large companies. They've already begun to evaluate the new normal by sending out polls and questionnaires to their people to determine what they will want to see before returning to the physical office environment. One trend that I see emerging across the board, and one that I validated in the poll that I mentioned, is that there is a very small percentage of people who seem to state that their preference is to just return to the physical office environment as soon as it's safe to do so. It's less than 10%. More than 30% of people want to just stay working from home or working remotely. The majority of the people, close to 60%, state that they want to return to the physical office environment, but on some sort of modified schedule or in a hybrid manner, where time at work is split between the company's physical office and then remote work or work in a virtual environment. Based on all of this, I think that it's clear that many companies need to be prepared for a new normal, and they're going to need to alter their physical spaces to accommodate that new normal. If you're responsible for managing this, for figuring out how to configure your office space to get people to come back in, prepare to be flexible. Build resiliency into your plan, and remember that there will probably not be a one-size-fits-all solution. The pandemic has changed the way many people think about their health and how people socialize and interact with each other. Now, there are industries like construction and manufacturing who have teams of people whose function is to protect the safety and health of their coworkers. These safety professionals are well versed in understanding which steps are the most effective, and they're trained to evaluate risk to determine where their efforts are needed. While these teams typically spend their time in the field or out in the warehouse, the companies with safety professionals are able to tap into their knowledge to help keep people in the office safe and healthy as they begin to return. For companies where everyone works in a typical office environment, though, there may not be a team of safety professionals for you to leverage. So let's take just a few minutes and let me give you a crash course on being a safety and health professional. Why? Because, as I said a minute ago, people are concerned about their health. If you expect them to return to the office, they're going to expect you to be concerned about their health too. No, this course isn't going to prepare you to take any certified safety and health professional exams, but I do think you should at least understand the concept that safety professionals refer to as the hierarchy of controls. This is often visualized as an inverted pyramid with the types of controls listed vertically. The idea is that when you're evaluating what you can do about a particular hazard, the controls at the top of the list are the most effective, and then as you work your way down, the controls are less effective. In our case here, the hazard is the virus that we've been dealing with during the last year or so. Now, it goes without saying that the control at the top of the list, elimination, is the obvious choice for most effective. Now, how we make that happen is probably a little beyond the scope of this course, and substitution is not really applicable here either, so let's move to the things we can do. That leaves us with engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE, or personal protective equipment. Engineering controls refer to steps that we can take to isolate a person from the hazard through physical or mechanical means. This includes things like physical barriers to isolate people, or replacing handles with touchless devices to prevent people from coming in contact with surfaces. Administrative controls refer to changes that we make in the way people work. Things like encouraging people to maintain distance from each other, increasing cleaning frequency, and even posting signage to remind people of rules and proper etiquette. And finally, PPE, or personal protective equipment, is equipment worn by people to protect themselves from a real or potential hazard. The reason this is at the bottom of the list is that there are many things that have to happen correctly for PPE to work and be effective. It has to be matched to the hazard. It has to fit correctly. The user has to keep it on at all times when exposed to the hazard. The user has to be trained in its use, and the PPE has to be maintained or replenished in order to remain effective. I actually have a whole course on PPE here on LinkedIn Learning that you might find useful. For this course, though, we're going to focus on those engineering and administrative controls, those changes that we can make to the workplace to help people stay healthy, and even those physical changes that we can make to the environment that encourage people to work in a manner that lets them be productive while staying safe and healthy. It's important to keep in mind that the conditions under which people have dealt with work and life during this pandemic have varied greatly throughout the world. I know many people that have been completely out of the physical workspace for many, many months. Some of them have also faced lockdowns and isolation at home, while others have continued to venture out into places like grocery stores and restaurants. I think that one thing is consistent for most people, though, and that is that the places that they have been visiting during the pandemic look different. Stores and restaurants have taken steps to reduce occupancy, increase sanitization, and encourage distancing. Tables and chairs have been removed or respaced. Physical barriers have been added, like the clear plastic dividers that have become commonplace in most stores and restaurants. Outdoor space has also been repurposed. And all of these establishments have signs of some sort to remind customers of required behaviors. Now, some of the physical changes to these spaces have been mandated by government or health authorities, and others have been made to make people feel safe so that they would leave their houses and shop at that store or eat at that restaurant. As people return to the workplace, many are likely to expect to see these same physical changes made in the office environment. Now, again, in some cases, it may be mandated, but in others, it may be up to the facility manager or office manager to determine what changes they're going to make. Now, my advice here is to remember that we need to keep people safe, and we need them to feel safe if we expect them to return to the office. We need to think like safety professionals. If it's your job to prepare the office environment for the return of people, you should expect to put in some work developing a plan for an altered office environment. Of course, changes to spaces also cost money, so you should also consider budget constraints as you develop your plan. Some considerations include those that we've seen in the stores and restaurants. We can use those clear plastic dividers to separate reception staff from walk-in traffic. You can replace restroom fixtures with touchless devices. Increasing space between desks and workstations might help, and adding stations throughout the building for hand sanitizing might be important. These are just a few examples. I mentioned signage earlier, but don't underestimate the power of adding signs so people understand what's expected of them. It can be much more effective than having to constantly remind people or having to follow them around to move tables back to where they're supposed to be. Use signs throughout your facility to communicate your expectations. Now, every office environment will have different needs depending on their use and function. Referring back to that concept of engineering controls, though, you should be considering changes to spaces that separate people from any health hazards. And you should be considering changes that encourage and facilitate people to work in a manner that keeps everyone healthy. Depending on where in the world your office space happens to be, one of the big things that you may have to contend with when it comes to physical space is increased distancing. Whether it's a regulatory requirement, a corporate mandate, or it's just needed to facilitate people coming back to the office, this has been a very real condition in offices that have remained open or offices that have already opened. Now, I'll use a client of mine as an example. Because their business was deemed essential, their office remained open to a limited staff. But things could not remain the status quo. So in order to keep people safe and meet social distancing requirements, the capacity of all the rooms had to be changed and posted. Conference rooms that could have easily held 6 people pre-pandemic had to be relabeled for a maximum capacity of 2 or 3 people. The training room that I regularly used could no longer hold 35 people. It was down to about 12. And some of the pods of open office space with multiple desks had to be reconfigured, or someone had to manage how many people could come in at one time. This is a trend that is likely to continue for a while for many companies. Dealing with changes in the physical space is one of the biggest challenges that facility managers or office managers may have to deal with. People have spent the last year with personal space going from a nicety to a necessity, and they're likely to expect that to continue when they go back to the office. If there's a mandate or a desire to maintain physical distancing, it may really dictate how you bring people back to the office. Take, for example, the training room I mentioned. If you have to seat one person per table and you have to space those tables to maintain, say, at least 1 meter of distance between people, that is going to dictate your layout and your maximum room capacity. In an open office plan, like one that might house a customer support team, where the old norm was to have them seated side by side at workstations that face each other across the table, the capacity would be greatly reduced if you need to increase spacing to maintain distancing. You will easily cut the capacity in half. If physical distancing is the mandate, you need to plan accordingly. You'll either need to plan for more physical space or make sure those in charge of scheduling people understand that you will not be able to accommodate the same number of people that you have in the past. In offices that have lots of movement of people, or just spaces within those office facilities like break rooms and kitchens, you'll have to determine how many people can comfortably occupy the space while maintaining distance. You may have to remove chairs or entire tables to enforce capacities. If this is the intent, consider removing the furniture completely. If you simply stack chairs in the corner, people are likely to grab them and set them back up. Now, if you are going to redesign the space completely, there are some tools out there that can help you do that. There are several software solutions that'll help you design and lay out spaces. If you use AutoCAD, we have a course here on LinkedIn Learning called Facilities Management, Social Distancing, and PPE that can provide some additional guidance. If you use Revit for 3D modeling, consider using their generative design plugin to rapidly generate multiple layout alternatives based on your inputs. Dynamo for Revit contains similar functionality. There's also a new product by Cove Tool that uses a grid-based analysis method to evaluate your floor plan layouts, and then it scores them based on their likelihood to facilitate social distancing. Don't wait until people are returning to figure out your capacities. New expectations for physical distancing may play a big role in determining how many people can return at once, and you may really have to consider how space will be repurposed. Like I mentioned in my earlier example, what was a conference room for 6 or 8 may now end up being a huddle room for 3. If you have large open space for call centers or customer support teams, your capacity may be greatly reduced. The client that I mentioned earlier was able to accommodate this by repurposing space they previously used for conferences and large gatherings. So what they did is they moved half the tables into spaces like that so that they could accommodate the same number of employees returning to the office while keeping them spaced out. They lost their banquet space by doing it, but they were unlikely to use the space for that purpose in the near future anyway. As you determine the new layout of your physical spaces, you're going to want to take steps to ensure that people don't change it. Unless you provide clear instructions, people are likely to show up and rearrange all of your hard work to suit what they think it should be. My advice here is to make sure that returning staff is given very clear instructions not to move any furniture or rearrange the workspaces. Reinforce those instructions with signs posted in those spaces. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with letting them provide input after a few weeks of trying out the new arrangements, but this should be a controlled process that gathers input and then considers that input along with other requirements and information before you make any adjustments. While my previous discussion on decreased capacities due to distancing expectations may be troubling due to those tasked with where to seat everyone, this next discussion might offer some relief. The current belief of many is that as we do begin to bring people back to the physical workspace, it'll most likely not be an immediate return to work for the entire office staff. The pandemic has forced people to learn to be effective while working remotely, and some people have been very happy and very successful doing so. It is likely that some percentage of the office staff will continue to do so even after the facilities are reopened to all of them. Others will prefer to work out a hybrid schedule, where they will be in the office each week, but not every day or not for the entire day. I have some colleagues and clients that have been running this type of hybrid schedule for many months now with great success. I've seen some engineering and design firms, for example, where much of the staff is working remotely, supported by the hardware and the CAD software that allows them to do their job from a workstation at home. These people may only return to the office as needed to collaborate with others in person. But since we figured out how to collaborate and meet virtually, they probably won't need to do this every day. I've seen several of them work out very successful scheduling arrangements that have half of the staff scheduled to be in the office on Monday and Wednesday, and the other half on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Friday is an open day that all of them can request in advance. In some cases, this may alleviate the need for reconfiguring the office. Take the example of a customer support team. If you're able to accommodate half of them in the office while maintaining distancing and preventing overcrowded spaces by just seating them at every other desk or workstation, then this may require very little rework of the physical space. Looking at another example of, say, a design firm, this may have to work a little differently and may require some reconfiguration. In this case, many design firms work in teams or studio groups. They wouldn't want to split the group in half because they would want all of them to be together on their in days to facilitate collaboration. The challenge would be that in the past, they would all sit grouped together to facilitate this collaboration. But that seating or workspace arrangement may not allow for increased distancing. In this case, desks or workstations may have to be rearranged to allow for more distancing. Some workstations may need to be removed, or some may need to be reassigned to facilitate this. So I'll go back with a simple example of a firm with 4 different practice groups. You may need to accommodate only 2 groups each day, but they'll need to occupy all of the space previously occupied by all 4. Again, you may be able to keep the existing configuration, but just reassign workstations. But in some cases, you may need to reconfigure the spaces while removing some of those tables or workstations altogether. So this brings me to my final scenario, which is an arrangement called hot desking or hoteling. Now, these are actually 2 similar concepts where you're recognizing that the office will only house a fraction of the people employed at any given time, whether that's half or a third or whatever's determined. No one gets a permanently assigned workspace anymore. Instead, on the days they're scheduled to be in the office or the days they request to be in the office, they'll be assigned a workspace for the day. In the hot desking scenario, the desks and workspaces are assigned on demand as employees arrive and depart. In the hoteling arrangement, employees can reserve space in advance. This could be for a day at a time or for longer periods where they may need dedicated space to complete a project or collaborate with others. The workspaces would be entirely reconfigured, and the decreased capacity can be used to allow for any desired distancing. The reduced capacity can also result in more space that's freed up. Now, some people are planning on using this freed up space to create new rooms or new spaces for huddle rooms where small groups or teams can gather to collaborate when needed, but then return to their workstation to get some separation for the remainder of the day. For some larger offices and firms, there seems to be a great deal of consideration being given to this arrangement, and it's not a bad thing to consider for smaller groups. Again, the idea will be to work within a hybrid scheduling structure that brings fewer people into the office at a time, but that allows them to come in as needed to interact and collaborate with each other. Reducing the number of workstations can give you added space to create huddle rooms, and you may consider adding call rooms or pods. These are smaller rooms or booths that people can duck into when they need to make a call or do some other activity away from the group. A couple of things to consider here, though. One is the fact that someone will need to manage this hot desking arrangement and the scheduling and assignment of workstations to prevent the entire staff from all showing up on the same day and having nowhere to sit. Now, there are several software solutions out there to help you manage that. Just search online for hotel desking or hot desking to find a solution that fits your needs. The other consideration is how are you going to create the new spaces like huddle rooms or phone booths? And we'll take a look at that next. Considering our discussions so far, if you're going to need to reconfigure and possibly create new spaces, it will obviously take some planning and some money. One of the big questions being asked by many managers is, how much of my budget do I want to spend on the unknown? Now, that's a fair question, given the fact that most of us are really not sure how permanent any of these changes will be. One option is always to bring in construction crews to do new tenant improvements, rip out the old space and build new space. The challenge here is that this is somewhat permanent, it can be costly, and in many places, labor and materials for construction are expensive, they're in high demand and in short supply right now. So another option is to go the modular route. Now, there have been some modular options out there for a while, with the typical office cubicle arrangement being a simple example. But lately, I've been seeing some new solutions being marketed that allow for more privacy and separation than the old cubicles that we've been used to in the past. One option to consider is the use of completely portable pods. Now, these can range in size from one-person phone booths to small huddle rooms that can accommodate several people at a time to create an instant space for collaboration. If you currently have large open office floor plans, you could utilize these pods to immediately create new private rooms. This, in combination with rearranging and respacing your existing workstations, could give you a very rapid solution to creating the new spaces that you need to accommodate returning workers. I found a couple of solutions here by just searching online for portable phone booths or portable office booths. Now, some of them even incorporate filtration and air purification. Just be aware there is definitely a bit of a cost involved with these spaces. Depending on how many spaces you're attempting to add, I'm not sure that it's any less expensive than just bringing in a contractor to build out new rooms. The advantage here, though, is the fact that these can be deployed much faster, and if you decide to reconfigure later, they can be moved away just as easily. Now, another solution that's emerging is the use of modular wall systems. When it comes to modular walls, the solutions tend to fit into one of three categories. So one, if you're looking for a more permanent solution that will take some planning but can still be deployed faster than typical construction solutions, there are companies out there who specialize in custom designing and fabricating modular wall components that are manufactured completely in their facilities and then shipped to your site for installation inside your existing space. Again, this can be a great solution for transforming existing office plans, with the advantages being that there's much less disruption than traditional construction, and the time required to install on site is typically much less. Now, these modular wall systems can be designed and built with power and data distribution built right in, and can even include built-in furniture solutions. Another solution that requires a little less planning and development is to use one of the cubicle-type wall solutions, but with taller wall panels that can reach 7, 8, or even 9 feet tall to provide that separation that you might be looking for.
Mami.
Finally, I've been seeing some companies producing a much lighter and much more portable modular wall system that can be installed, moved, and reconfigured on demand. While the first two solutions will require some planning and probably professional installation, this last solution has the potential to be installed on demand without the need to bring in professional installers. This solution would allow for more flexibility and reconfiguration later if your needs change. Now, certainly none of these solutions is free. Availability and cost will really depend on your needs, your location, and then local availability. Now, of course, many of these modular solutions have the ability to be shipped anywhere, which may increase availability. If you think one of these modular or pre-built solutions may fit your needs, do a search online for modular wall systems to see what's available in your area. With many people preferring to continue to work at home for at least part of the work week, I don't think there's any question that we're going to see a continued evolution into a hybrid meeting environment. Meetings where some people are physically present in the office and others will attend virtually from wherever they're working. Now, to be successful, this type of meeting really needs some thought put into the configuration and the resources that'll be available. Let's look at a typical arrangement that I've already experienced. So you schedule a meeting, you pick a conference room, and you create a remote link to join via Teams or Zoom, and then you send it out to the 6 people that you need to attend. Half elect to attend remotely, while the other half will attend in person. Now, is your conference room set up to handle that? Prior to the pandemic, you may have just expected your 6 required attendees to show up in the conference room so you could all meet and collaborate. But now half of them are going to attend virtually. Are you prepared to give them a good experience that facilitates collaboration? Many conference rooms just are not set up for this. And what I've experienced is this environment where the facilitator that scheduled the meeting brings in their laptop and they start the remote version of the meeting. The remote people dial in while the in-person attendees try to gather around that laptop. And then the in-person attendees begin to feel uncomfortable because they're not maintaining any distance from each other. So the remote attendees then all of a sudden can't hear or see the people that begin to stand away from the laptop or that are seated on the other side of the conference table, and everyone struggles to both share and see collaborative content. That usually results in the other in-person attendees attempting to solve the challenge by opening their laptops to join remotely, which doesn't help because the sound of the 3 remote connections all in the same room just doesn't work. So then each one leaves to find a quiet place in the office, and now everyone's frustrated, and everyone's attending virtually anyway and taking up more rooms or desks in the office. To prevent this, your conference rooms will probably need to be changed. Whether it's your existing larger conference rooms or smaller huddle rooms that I discussed earlier, they need to be configured to accommodate both in-person and virtual attendees and give them all a good experience that facilitates collaboration. Now, before I give you some potential solutions, I want to let you know that I'm going to focus here on the physical hardware and changes to the spaces. There are many different software solutions, and many people already have their favorites, and there are plenty of courses here on LinkedIn Learning to teach you how to use the software. As for the physical solutions, let's look at a few examples for different types of spaces. All of these solutions are aimed at bringing live attendees and virtual attendees together at the same time. To do this well, you need a screen that's bigger than your laptop. It needs to be placed where everyone in the room can see it, and actually 2 screens is really better than 1. Ideally, you would have one screen that would show all of the virtual attendees and another screen that would show any shared content like slides or shared documents. Mounting these screens so that they can be turned and repositioned will really give you the most flexibility. Next, you'll need to consider the camera that will capture all of the in-person attendees and broadcast them out to the virtual attendees. Your goal here should be to find a way to make sure that the virtual attendees can always see and hear the person that's speaking. Now, there are many solutions out there, but they all seem to fall into, I think, one of 2 categories. So first is a camera mounted near the screens that automatically moves to capture the person that's speaking. This works well in a room where people will all face the screens and therefore the camera. So as someone begins to speak, the camera and the microphone will turn to face them and broadcast the speaker out to the virtual attendees. For smaller huddle rooms, there are small devices that contain multiple cameras or panoramic cameras to capture everyone in the room. This can be used in conjunction with a speaker and microphone device that sits in the middle of the table so everyone can be seen and heard. One example of this is called the Jabra Panicast. Its multiple cameras allow it to capture everyone in the room without requiring everyone to huddle close together. It can also be set up to pan and zoom in on the speaker. Now, the first example I gave you is a fixed solution that would be installed permanently in each conference room. The Panicast can either be installed permanently or mounted on a small tripod to make it portable so it can be checked out and placed where it's needed. Now, I've also used a completely portable device called the Meeting Owl. This device actually houses a 360-degree camera, speakers, and microphones, and it can be placed either at the front of the room like the Panicast, or it can be placed in the middle of a conference table that everyone's seated around. The hardware will capture and display a 360-degree view of all of the attendees in the room, and it'll zoom in on the active speaker to present both views to the virtual attendees. These solutions are actually fairly easy to implement. I like both the Panicast and the OWL solutions because they can be portable and they're fairly plug-and-play solutions. Just keep in mind, the Panicast captures a range of 180 degrees in front of where it's placed, and it produces great quality video. The OWL can capture an entire 360-degree view of the room when it's placed in the middle. The image can be a little lower quality than a single camera, but that's a function of the fact that it's capturing the entire 360-degree view of the room. What you do need to remember is that whatever solution you choose, it will probably be unfamiliar to your users. This means that in addition to altering the physical space, you'll probably need to provide some training so that everyone can take advantage of the new hardware.
Meron lang ako dito. Busy lang.
One of the engineering controls that some